Well, hello, I'm Josh and I'm back once again with another film to tell you about. And this week I'm going to be talking about the classic film from Michael Powell and Emeric Pressburger, Black Narcissus. So Black Narcissus is based on a novel by the author Rumer Godden that follows a group of nuns who face hardships from all directions as they try to start a convent on the site of an old palace in the Himalayas. Okay, so maybe by that premise, this film might sound a little bit boring, but trust me, it's not. And in fact, I have to say, I feel this is one that just about everyone can enjoy. As you can see, it has some incredible visuals, and with a really gripping story topped with a crazy tonal shift at the end, it feels almost like something from an Alfred Hitchcock film. So as I mentioned before, this was made by the British directing duo Michael Powell and Emeric Pressburger. Now today, sadly, they aren't very well known, but back in their prime, they were actually considered to be one of the most creative teams to come out of the British film industry. They made a great number of classics, including The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, The Red Shoes, A Matter of Life and Death, The Thief of Baghdad, A Canterbury Tale. Just so many incredible films, and Black Narcissus was considered to be one of their best. One of the things they were known for was just taking advantage of the incredible studio set work and the pioneering special effects that were being developed at the time. And they would bring all these elements together to make what I feel to be some of the quintessential studio films. Films that would have been infinitely worse had they tried to shoot them on location. Now, normally that's not something you usually hear praise for. I mean, nowadays, the true studio set-based production is somewhat considered outdated, at least in the way that it was often done in those days. Nowadays, they usually try everything they can to hide the fact that it's in the studio and try and really make it look realistic. But instead, Powell and Pressburger would often just lean into the kind of dreamlike quality that these studios would undoubtedly create. And strangely enough, somehow in doing this, it seems to make the film feel even more real. I mean, look at these incredible matte paintings that were done for the film. They're just so vibrant and extreme. Most people today will probably catch one or two and say, oh, I see that's an effect. And yet I don't think anyone after watching this would realize that the film was almost entirely shot in a studio. For the most part, the outdoor scenes were shot on a backlot, with painted mountains placed all around them, and only a handful of shots were done outside the studio, with nothing being done in India. When you see what the exterior sets actually look like, you'll find it's incredible what they were able to do with them. As I mentioned earlier, several of these shots were helped through a set extension technique called matte painting. And this was basically where you build the part of the set that the actors would interact with. You would build that practically, and then you would kind of leave space in the frame for whatever you want to be extended. Then later, after the film is developed, it is projected and a painter actually comes in on a large glass pane and actually paints in the rest of the set. And they take special care to blend the edges together because that is where the actual line where the real and the fake set is. And so when the painting's finished, they actually have it framed up and they re-photograph all the shots with the painting overlay to complete the effect. And once you know how it works, it's a bit easier to figure out where it is in certain films, mainly because you now know what to look for. But I have to say, it still works incredibly well with this film. And despite the physical painting aspect of this technique feeling a bit outdated, this was really one of the most popular special effects at the time, and was even used well into the 80s and 90s on some pretty popular special effects heavy films like Star Wars and Indiana Jones. And even though the glass painting aspect of it is more or less a thing of the past, the actual principle is still used today, except they use CGI extensions instead of painted ones. And along with the special effects of this film, one of the things that makes Black Narcissus really stand out today is the beautiful Technicolor visuals it's filled with. It's really no wonder this film won the Best Color Cinematography Oscar that year. And in fact, in their heyday, Powell and Pressburger were not only known for just making these incredible, very creative, special effect-filled studio films, but They were also known for making some of the most beautiful Technicolor films in existence. And a large part of this was due to their frequent collaborator, cinematographer Jack Cardiff. So Cardiff was actually one of the few cinematographers who was trained to use the Technicolor film process pretty early on in its creation. And when he first worked with Powell and Pressburger, it was on their film The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, and he was credited just as the Technicolor cameraman. And then following that, he was brought on as the director of photography on A Matter of Life and Death, and then this film after that. And Jack Cardiff was really one of the pioneers of the format with these beautiful films that he would make with them. And Cardiff actually said that he learned most of what he knows about cinematography through studying paintings. And when he started out with Technicolor, he was still not technically very knowledgeable. And you can definitely feel this painterly inspiration that he was drawing from with just all the different colors. He's really pushing all the elements of the shots to add to the drama of the scene. And as I just mentioned, in many scenes they are actually using paintings as the background. And so they find a way to bring these two together to make some truly breathtaking images. What makes the cinematography in this film truly great, though, is that it's not just there to be pretty set dressing. The visuals really do add to the film, and they help tell the story in a way that only a film can. The nuns, who are noted for dressing in very plain white habits and clothes, make an effort to push away from distractions and try and focus on the essentials. So when they are faced with this location, which is just incredible to look at and just so extreme with the steep cliff and the mountains and trees all around them, several of them find it really difficult to not be completely distracted by everything they see. As the character Mr. Dean even says later in the film.
I told you it was no place to put a nunnery. There's something in the atmosphere that makes everything seem exaggerated.
And Powell and Pressburger really use every aspect of filmmaking, from the visuals to the score, to make the audience feel a connection to the characters and feel they are actually there. And I mean, I don't want to go too much into spoilers because even though this is considered a classic film, I feel like there's a large majority of people that have not seen it. And first viewing for this film is pretty amazing, so I want to leave that open. But there's a point in the film where a character does something where if I were to show you the clip without any context, you'd probably be kind of mildly surprised, I suppose. But I doubt you would think it would be that big of a deal. However, within the context of the rest of the film, and through the perspective that Powell and Pressburger have presented it, it's a scene that even today audiences point to as a shock, which is amazing because it's almost 80 years later. And I feel that's really a mark of a good director, or directors in this case. To be able to bring an audience in and connect them with a character in such a way that even something seemingly trivial can have a huge emotional impact. And this is one of the things I love about watching classic films. When you find a film, or even just a moment, that is so effective that it doesn't matter how old it is, it just works. And when it's wrapped up with this crazy tonal shift like it is with this film, it just made that much more of an impact on me. Now, not to say that every movie needs this tonal shift, but when I went into this film, I knew it was like a great classic movie. But given the age and the subject matter, I was pretty prepared for it to be a bit on the slow side. And so when I put it in, I was just blown away by how amazing it looked and how inventive the camera work and the effects were, and also by how dramatic and chilling the music was. But then it shifts from this somewhat slow drama into this just visually stunning thriller. And like I said, it just felt like the film kept topping itself. Now I could talk about the visuals and the special effects for seemingly hours, just because they are the first things that really grab you when you turn on the film. But through the many times that I've rewatched this film since, I've also noticed just how great of a story it is too. I feel it's somewhat like my experiences watching an Orson Welles film, how your focus is almost solely drawn to the visuals your first watch through. They're just so stunning. And then when you rewatch it, you realize how great the story is on top of that. And not to say this film is confusing or anything. I feel it's much more straightforward than something like Touch of Evil. But as I said, on later watches, I really found myself appreciating the writing and the story of the film as well. But one interesting thing I found out about the story in particular is that though on the surface it just seems like a story about the nuns that try and establish a convent in the Himalayas, for the people that were actually watching it in 1947 when this film came out, they would have come away with a completely different meaning to the story that most people nowadays would not even think of. And that being that when the book was written, India was actually a colony of the British Empire. And they had actually been colonized, I believe, in like the 1500s. So the colonialism period at this point had been going on for a long time. And so even when the book Black Narcissus was written, India was considered a colony of the British Empire. And so if you actually watch the film with that context, you can see they were actually commenting on the colonization that was going on, and especially the cracks that were forming at the time, and how this attempt to control would inevitably fail, incidentally happening just before this film released. And I mean, as you can see, when the nuns first get there, they aren't really interested in learning about the culture. They aren't necessarily hostile towards any of the natives, but they pretty clearly see themselves as superior to them.
Oh, sister, the schoolroom is overflowing with children. We've nothing unpacked yet. No one understands the language. There are too many of them anyway, and they smell.
And I mean, given this approach, it's no wonder they end up turning on them. Sister Clodagh later compares this to as if they were trying to keep the wind from blowing, kind of describing this feeling that they are fighting the wind to make it work, even though they inevitably know it's not going to last very long. So yeah, I thought that was a really interesting aspect of the story that I don't think a lot of people would connect on their own. But of course, I can't end this video without talking about all the great actors in it. But I will say there is one kind of disclaimer to this film. So like I mentioned with Touch of Evil, back in those days there was not really much diversity when it came to racial representation. Now, thankfully, a majority of the actors in this film were actually Indian. However, there are still a few instances of brown face makeup on white actors, which sadly kind of dates this otherwise very modern feeling film. I mean, I suppose the actors are still pretty good in their roles. And Gene Simmons' character is somewhat implied to be half white, so I don't know if that half counts, but it's just something to be aware of when you're watching some of these old films. And thankfully, one of the really good instances where this is not the case is with the young prince, who is played by the actor Sabu. And the main nun in the film, Sister Clodagh, is played wonderfully by Deborah Kerr, who you may remember from some films like one I talked about a while ago, The Innocents, and From Here to Eternity. And one of her earliest film roles was actually another Powell and Pressburger film, The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp. And so it was pretty interesting. By this point, she was actually popular enough that they had a little bit of a tough time trying to get her on the film because she was getting offered so many roles. David Farrar was another big actor at the time. I wouldn't say he's too famous nowadays, and apparently he had a chance to be bigger, but he kind of just got tired of acting, and so he retired in, I believe, early to mid-50s. But probably one of the most notable performances in Black Narcissus is Kathleen Byron as Sister Ruth. And when you compare her in this film to some of her earlier work, she's pretty much unrecognizable. In this, she can just completely startle and creep you out, and combined with the very dramatic visuals and music, she becomes one of the most memorable aspects of the film. So since its release, Black Narcissus has been considered one of the greatest films of all time. It has been cited as a huge influence on filmmakers from Martin Scorsese to Edgar Wright. And an interesting fact, Scorsese's longtime editor, Thelma Schoonmaker, was actually married to Michael Powell up until his death in 1990. And I'll say if you hear him in interviews, Scorsese is a huge fan of Powell and Pressburger. And he appears in some shape or form in just about every Criterion release of one of their films, so that's pretty cool. And in the commentary tracks, like the one for this film, he actually points out specific moments in the film and talks about how he drew from that to put in some of his own films. So if you like to watch Black Narcissus, you have a few options. So if you want to get it digitally, it looks like it's available to rent or buy from either iTunes or Amazon Prime. And if you want to stream it, it's available on the Criterion channel and HBO Max. And physically, getting it from Criterion is probably going to be your best bet. The film's been restored several times over the years, and I believe this is a relatively recent restoration for the Blu-ray. And in fact, this is one of the earlier films that was added to the collection, and the commentary track I mentioned earlier was actually recorded back in 1988 for the Laserdisc edition. And what's really cool about that is not only does it have Martin Scorsese, but it also has Michael Powell, who was still alive back then. And I mean, I don't know, I just think it's really incredible that we are able to hear really some of the pioneers from cinema way back in the studio system talk about their films. I mean, to think Michael Powell was born in 1905, so the fact that we can hear him talking about this film as like a bonus feature is pretty incredible. But before I get too off topic, let's talk about the comment question. And this week, I am wondering, what is your favorite Powell and Pressburger film? They were really one of the great creative duos in film history, and they made some truly incredible films. But if by chance you haven't actually seen any of their films, maybe go through each of their IMDb pages, and maybe just list a few that you're interested in checking out. I mean, their films are way easier to see than ever before, and in much better quality too. So yeah, put your favorites in the comments section below and start discussing. Be sure to hit the like button if you enjoy this video, and subscribe if you want to see some more of these. Be sure to keep watching movies and have a great rest of your day.